Good evening. That marvelous piece that you just heard was by the Atlanta Symphony Youth Orchestra under the musical direction of Maestro Joseph Young. Let's give them another round of applause, please. Welcome to the Americans for the Arts 28th Annual Nancy Hanks Lecture on Arts and Public Policy. I'm Bob Lynch, President and CEO of Americans for the Arts, and I want to thank you for joining us here tonight at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. You'll get a chance to hear more from this impressive orchestra consisting of 106 young musicians ranging from age 13 to 18, and there are more than 400 community-based youth orchestras in America involving over 40,000 young musicians. We are joined tonight by many special guests, including House Democratic Leader Nancy Pelosi, our great friend. Congressional Arts Caucus Chair, the wonderful Louise Slaughter of New York. My own U.S. Senator from the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts, my original home state and where I still vote, Senator Ed Markey, and so that there is at least one other person who knows how to properly pronounce the word arts as arts. So. Senator Al Franken of Minnesota is here with us. And I'm going to read off a number of representatives, but I want to say Representatives Ken Buck of Colorado, Glenn Grothman of Wisconsin, Tony Cardenas of California, Suzanne Bonamici, Oregon, and chair of the STEAM Caucus, co-chair of the STEAM Caucus, Ted Deutsch of Florida, and Mark Takano of California. Please. We are honored tonight to have with us the National Endowment for the Arts Chairman Jane Chu, confirmed as the 11th chair in June 2014. And also Chairman Frank Hotzel. I'd like them both to please stand, and I think Chairman Chu is in the back up there, so please. There she is. This year, we will celebrate the 50th anniversary of the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities, signed into law by President Lyndon Johnson on September 29th, 1965. So we look forward to a year of celebration. We're gathered here because we all believe in the power of the arts to transform the quality of our lives, to improve education for our children, and the quality of our communities. How would we communicate our history and our dreams without the arts and artists? And many of you in the audience and here on stage tonight and behind me are artists, whether you are a musician or a dancer or a writer or a painter or a filmmaker, actor, or singer. And we are grateful to all of you, and especially to the artists on our Americans for the Arts Artists Committee, who are helping us bring national attention to our issues, both tonight and on Capitol Hill tomorrow, for arts advocacy. And they include Norman Lear, Common, Holland Taylor, Doc Shaw, Victoria Rowell, and from the rock band OAR, lead singer Mark Roberge and lead guitar Richard Ahn. Thank them. We know that when it comes to making change happen in politics, it also takes behind-the-scenes, hard, grassroots advocacy to make our case. And that's why we have 87 of the most important national arts and civic advocacy organizations in our nation, representing more than 100,000 nonprofit cultural organizations of every discipline throughout every region of the country as national co-sponsors of Arts Advocacy Day. And they're joined by another 400 state and local arts leaders from around the country who are being shadowed by 100 future arts leaders currently enrolled in university and college arts administration programs. And I would like all of these Arts Advocacy Day participants to stand and be recognized for the valuable advocacy work that you are doing to help the arts and education arrive in America. Thank you. There they are. Beautiful. Thank you. I mentioned the 50th anniversary of the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the policy vote in September 1965 that has resulted in over $5 billion in funding the arts in the last 50 years. That's significant. Tonight, we celebrate policy with this policy lecture, but tomorrow is advocacy. And what really fascinates me is the work done for the 5 years before that vote, the advocacy work of people like you. And this brings me to one advocate in particular who I would like to recognize. Nancy Hanks herself said he was the nation's first arts lobbyist. His name is Jack Golodner, and he's here tonight. And he may not be a household name, but he is someone who has impacted each and every one of us. In the early 60s, Jack left his chief of staff job on Capitol Hill and opened his own lobbying firm. He represented Actors' Equity and worked with Americans for the Arts, then Another Name, and Nancy Hanks, and then eventually became the founder and longtime president of the AFL-CIO Department of Professional Employees, representing 4.4 million workers and all the artist unions. He was also hired by Nancy Hanks at the Rockefeller Brothers Fund when she was there and serving as the chair of our organization, then named Arts Councils of America. And together, the two of them, along with many others it has been my privilege to know, worked behind the scenes to get the very first legislation passed to create, first, the National Council on the Arts in 1964, and then in 1965, the law that created the two endowments. Now, Jack had a chance to bring in such groups as the AFL-CIO, the Garment Workers, Steel Workers, and Auto Workers Unions, the Boy and Girl Scouts of America, AARP, and the Junior League. And together they got to know well and convinced lawmakers that the arts were a powerful economic force that benefited every American. He talked about jobs, about communities, about the grassroots. And he also knew that some good old-fashioned House of Cards style dealing was necessary to get things done in D.C. One example, it was a hot D.C. day in August 20th, 1964, when H.R. 9586, the legislation to create the National Council on the Arts, was languishing in the House on the last day to vote before the House adjourned for many of them to attend the 1964 Democratic National Convention. Jack learned about the vote crisis, and he knew it would be years before this opportunity came again. He immediately went to meet with Hubert Humphrey in his Senate office. You see, Hubert Humphrey was just 4 days away from being officially nominated as the Democratic vice presidential running mate to President Johnson. And when Senator Humphrey heard about the logjam, he picked up the phone and pulled then Speaker of the House, John McCormack, Massachusetts, off of the House floor to tell him he needed him to move up consideration of the arts bill. You could do that in those days. It must have been some call, because hours later the bill was moved up to vote and it passed the House 213 to 135. And the very next year, in 1965, Jack spent many late evenings working with Senator Claiborne Pell's staffer, Livingston Biddle, another former chair of the NEA, in drafting the original legislative language to create the National Foundation for the Arts. And it is because of his early advocacy work that the National Endowment will celebrate its 50th anniversary this fall. This is how advocacy works. And so, I would like to ask Jack Golodner to stand. He's out there somewhere. There you go, sir. Jack, you'll be pleased to know that we've continued to expand our advocacy coalition. I'm pleased that we have our public sector partners with us tonight, including Tom Cochran, longtime CEO of the United States Conference of Mayors, and Matt Chase of the National Association of Counties, as well as Jerry Abramson with the White House Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. And finally, please help me thank our sponsors this evening, Nancy Stevens, Rick Rosenthal, Jamie and David Wolf of the Rosenthal Family Foundation, and Charles Seegers and his team at Ovation, the nation's only television arts network. Your partnership and your extraordinary generosity have played a key role in making this evening possible. We are deeply grateful. And you still don't get Norman Lear yet. There's more. So now a bit about tonight's program. When we asked Norman Lear what kind of music he likes, he said that he loves gospel, classical, patriotic, and spoken word. And being the award-winning producer that he is, Norman introduced us to the one person who could pull all of this together. Tonight's musical director, Nolan Williams Jr., is one of the country's foremost producers of inspirational arts programming. Highlights of his work include the music direction of the 2012 internationally televised dedication ceremony of the Martin Luther King Jr. National Memorial, and also the artistic direction of the 2014 Philadelphia Freedom Festival. For tonight's dedicated musical tribute to Norman Lear, Nolan has arranged a new Americana medley featuring the Atlanta Symphony Youth Orchestra along with the glorious Voices of Inspiration. Please enjoy. Was that not magnificent? And very impressive to see such young musicians perform at such a wonderfully high artistic level. Thank you again to Nolan, to the Atlanta Symphony Youth Orchestra, and the Voices of Inspiration Chorus. And we'll get to experience one more performance a little bit later. And so now, I would like to ask a remarkably talented individual and poet to formally introduce Norman Lear to the audience tonight. Common, along with his music partner John Legend, who is also an Americans for the Arts Artist Committee member, swept the 2015 award season this year for Best Original Song in Motion Picture at both the Academy Awards and the Golden Globes for their awe-inspiring song, Glory. His talent continues in many, many areas. Common has also played several dramatic roles in such films as Selma and Run All Night, both of which are currently showing in theaters nationwide. Common has also written several award-winning children's books, as well as his New York Times best-selling memoir, One Day It'll All Make Sense. He remains one of hip-hop's most innovative and positive voices, and he is here tonight to introduce his friend, Norman Lear. Please welcome Common.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Good evening. How's everybody feeling? Yes, this is a blessed night, an incredible night, so thank you for being here. If you've read his book, Even This I Get to Experience, then you know everything I'm about to say. If you haven't, you should get it. Because what I'm about to share with you is just a brief view of a life that is rich with story and laughs and love. Norman Lear was born in New Haven, Connecticut in 1922. And at the age of 92, has more energy than many men I know, like myself, or men half his age. He won admission to college after winning an oratorical contest called What the Constitution Means to Me, but dropped out of school to enlist in the Army during World War II, where he flew 52 missions as a radio operator gunner on B-17 bombers in Europe. He began his TV writing career in 1950 when he wrote for the Ford Star Review and the Colgate Comedy Hour. And his directing career began in 1958 with the film he wrote and directed called Divorce American Style. Oh, wow. That would garner him an Academy Award nomination for writing. Around the time I was born, 1972, he started creating the shows that defined my childhood. Shows like All in the Family, Maude, Sanford and Son, Good Times, The Jeffersons, One Day at a Time, and Mary Hartman, Mary Hartman. Yes. As I go down the list of all those shows, each one of those shows had had some effect upon my life. And I must say specifically shows like Good Times and The Jeffersons that really gave America a new look at black life and showed America what a black family could be, whether growing up in an impoverished area or a family like the Jeffersons, who we saw was moving on up. Well, the impact that these shows had upon us as young black kids was phenomenal. It really taught us in many ways who we were and what we could be, and to see that money didn't determine really what a black family is and what pride is and what dignity was. When you saw the good times and you saw how the mother, the matriarch, ran the family and the father was there to support the family, but at the same token, it was a family, and the neighborhood and the village helped support each other. It was a beautiful depiction and look at what black life is and what it could be, and I hope that it taught us all what black life is and what black life could be. And I must say that those shows really had a big influence on us as hip-hop artists. So many times you hear references to some of Norman's shows in rap songs and music abroad and pop culture, because it really was a way for us to relate to each other. We could talk about what JJ did last night or what happened with Weezy. So we love these shows, and I mean, for me to get the opportunity to even be in the presence of Norman Lear, the creator of these shows, is that much of an honor for me, so I just want to say that. Well, but Norman wasn't happy just creating great art, because that's what his shows are. They are art. Art that have won 4 Emmys and a Peabody Award and made him a force to be reckoned with on the TV screen and on the political scene. He took a look at the world around him and realized that there was more he could do. So he walked away from the shows and the paycheck, and in 1980 started working full-time on the creation of an organization, People for the American Way. That, 30 years later, remains a powerful voice for the principles of fairness and justice in this country and against the intolerant voices of religious fundamentalism in our country. So, Norman Lear is a war hero, he's a writer, he's an artist, he's an activist, he's a father, he's a husband, he's a grandfather. He's the kind of guy who can create characters and stories that influence your life, profoundly influence your life. And yet, you can still meet him and think, this guy is my friend. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so proud to introduce to you my friend, Norman Lear.
When Common was introduced, I thought it was louder. The loveliest thing he called me was his friend. I mean, that's the most uncommon man I know. And, you know, our relationship goes back a whole 6-8 weeks. Now, there's a way on a certain harmonic you can be in love with people you never met, and then suddenly you meet them and there it is. And he's been in my life forever. As he tells me, I have been in his. And I couldn't appreciate his being here for me more. Bless you. Thank you, Common. And Thank you, Americans for the Arts, for inviting me here tonight, and you art lovers out there for that exceedingly warm reception. I'm talking about the one I got. Now, it was warmer, I'm certain, than it would have been a few years ago. Because a few years ago, when I was 88, 89, I'd have gotten a great warm reception, I'm sure, but not as warm. You see, when I turned 90, something changed. And you guys, it wasn't me, it was you. I mean, I still get up out of a chair exactly the way I used to, but now I get applause. Seriously, I can cross a room and get an ovation. Watch this. But some of you may be familiar with my life from my recent memoir, which I was so thrilled Common mentioned. For the others, it just might help to know a little something about the man you invited here to the Kennedy Center to talk about the arts in America. In late June of 1931, and just out of third grade, I was a month away from turning 9 and looking forward eagerly to my first experience at summer camp. And I had a roll of cloth tape imprinted with Norman M. Lear, Norman M. Lear, Norman M. Lear. Sat on the kitchen counter, was waiting for my mother to sew it into my clothes that I was taking to camp with me. Meanwhile, my father was about to take a plane to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and it had only been 4 years or so since Charles Lindbergh flew 33 and a half hours from New York to Paris. And the fact of that had the rare plane that spotted in the sky that we kids would chase around yelling, "Lindy, Lindy," whatever the plane was. So my dad going to Oklahoma was really a big deal. He was traveling on some kind of business, and monkey business, said my mother, who sensed that he'd fallen in with the wrong guys and what guys who weren't to be trusted. And she was right, as it turned out, because 5 weeks later, he was convicted and sentenced to 3 years in Deer Island Prison off of the Boston Harbor for trying to sell some phony bonds to a Boston brokerage house. And that evening, our house was filled with friends and relatives and neighbors offering comfort as they checked out the furniture, too, because my mother decided we couldn't live there in this state of shame, and it's in Chelsea, and was selling the furniture. And at one point, someone I didn't know, it could have been a neighbor or a relative of some kind, who was about to buy my father's red leather chair, the throne, from which he controlled the radio dial, just as 40 years later, Archie would control the television dial from his Bunker family TV armchair. And as if that wasn't enough, I would soon learn that my mother was going to take my sister and move someplace I never really found out where, and leave me with various relatives, an uncle and another uncle, and finally with my grandparents, until my father could get out of jail and we were reunited. So I stood there clutching that Norman M. Lear roll of cloth. It was what was left of that summer dream, when someone, an uncle or a neighbor, placed his hands on my shoulders and looked deep into my, I'm sure, tear-filled full eyes, and announced with a smarmy smile, "Remember, Norman, you're the man of the house now." That had to be the moment when my awareness of the foolishness of the human condition was born. How could I not have developed a deep appreciation for the absurdities amid the gravity of our existence? And speaking of absurdities, a lot of years later, I received a call one Sunday morning in the 70s from a good friend who happened to be the head of the Television Academy of Arts and Sciences. And he was calling to inform me that they had met all day the previous day, Saturday, and had decided to start a Hall of Fame. And I was going to be among the first inductees, and when he told me who the others were, I went nuts. And I called my mother quickly in Bridgeport, Connecticut. She answered the phone, and I told her, as I'm sure breathlessly, "Mom, I just learned they decided to start a Television Academy of Hall of Fame. And among the first inductees are going to be General Sarnoff, who invented NBC, William Paley, who invented CBS, Edward R. Murrow, the greatest of the television journalists, Patty Chayefsky, the best of the writers that ever came out of television, Lucille Ball, Milton Berle, and me." And my mother said, "Listen, if that's what they want to do, who am I to say?" That always gets a great laugh. And I often wonder if such events didn't prepare me for the difficulties that came along with my success later in life. 1985, my partner, great man, Jerry Perenchio, suggested it was time to sell the company we had built with Bud Yorkin, and we did. So I took down a whole bunch of money, and on my own, I started what I called Act 3 Communications. And instead of sticking to media content that I understood, I made investments in the business of media, radio and TV stations, broadcast, publications, theaters, which I didn't begin to understand. And a few years later, I'd blown my fortune and reached a point where I was advised that we'd probably have to sell our home and start all over again. Having heard that we'd fallen into such straits, my son-in-law in New York called me and asked how I was feeling. And I said, "How am I feeling?" "I'm feeling lousy, of course." But then I guess I added this. I said, "But still, John, you know, something inside of me tells me even this I get to experience." And early the next morning, the phone is ringing off the hook, and I get out of bed and I answer the phone, and it's my son-in-law on the phone. And he said, "How you feeling this morning?" I said, "Lousy, like I was last night." He said, "You got to promise me something." I said, "Promise you what?" He said, "I heard you say once that you wanted to be cremated. You got to promise me that we can bury you." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because someday I want to take my children, your grandchildren, to a stone that reads, 'Even this I get to experience.'" So that's where the title of the memoir exists. And then I have this evening with you. Even this I get to experience. Thank you. You know, things were quite dire for me at the time of that phone call, as they are across the globe today. If that tall percentage of the world's top scientists are right about climate change, and I think they just might know a little something more than the Tea Party, things speaking of the Tea Party, are we not lucky Ted Cruz is really going to run? I mean, you know how much he's for the arts. I think he, 1982 or 78 or something like that, he found a crayon. Just fell in love with the arts. Anyway, things are dire and seem to be getting more dire by the day. And as far as all of the nations of our world are concerned, they have their own specific problems. 1% of the population in our country takes in 20% of the money earned by the rest of Americans. 22% of American kids and their families now live below the poverty line, and there are more black men and boys in confinement today. This is an amazing statistic. And there were slaves at the height of slavery. Quarrel with those statistics if you must. Believe whatever sales, whatever stats your political leanings may dictate. But our America has yet to deliver on its promise of equal opportunity and justice for all, and we all know it. And of course, across the globe, there are the endless conflicts between nations, peoples, and sects, the further threat that rogue nations will acquire the nuclear bomb, the specter of young men and women around the world, some of them unthinkably American, primed by the hopelessness around them, threatening to join bands of terrorists such as ISIS. I was deliberating just a few days ago whether to touch on such negatives before an audience collected in this hallowed chamber to celebrate the arts. When the House Budget Committee came out with their latest, and I saw that its leader wished to cut tax rates for millionaires and billionaires, the 0.1% who already owns as much wealth as the bottom 90%. And I still can't believe it, and decided to hell with it. This is the world we live in. I will talk about it. Thank you. But I want you to know, speaking as a former president used to speak, I want to make something perfectly clear. I don't want to wake up the morning I'm without hope. So I believe we will save our world. But when it is saved, I'm also very confident that the door will have been kicked open by the things that bring us together, the arts, the music, the film, the literature, the theater. Thank you. Photography, sculpture, dance, those things that cause us to see and hear as one. We are then free, of course, to delight in or disparage according to our individual tastes, but in the embrace of art and beauty, still one. We are one. I believe that heart and soul, head to toe, and I began to wonder many years ago how to make that meaningful to a culture that was growing so numbers-driven and spiritually sterile as America. The name of the game in corporate America today is the need to deliver a profit statement this quarter larger than the last and ostensibly forever. Nothing in human experience suggests that anything can grow forever. Yet the entire community of business thinkers, economists, strategists subscribe to that dictum. And it, of course, is sheer lunacy, a kind of corporate coup d'etat that has resulted in a general coarsening, I feel, of the culture, leading us away from the arts, and of course, leading us away from funding for the arts. It has taken us in an opposite direction, more towards militarism and violence, and we're seeing that everywhere. I know I'm into some heavy-duty stuff here, but as the president I referred to earlier says, let me make one thing perfectly clear again. I do not offer myself as an expert standing here tonight or a scholar on any of these matters, nor am I coming from that wise old man place. I am simply a listener and an observer, a keen observer perhaps, given how many years I've been at it. In that role. What's that? Love you back. And front. In that role, as I speak of where America is right now, I can't help but think of Dwight David Eisenhower, Ike, the five-star general who led us to victory in World War II, served 2 terms as President of these United States, and who, as he was leaving office, in his farewell address to the nation, warned us to beware of the potential for the development of a military-industrial complex. In an early draft, he termed it the military-industrial congressional complex. Given the earlier statistic about more males in confinement than there were slaves before the Civil War, our prisons now owned by corporations, we could be looking at the military-industrial prison complex. And the way I see it, Ike nailed where we are right now. The disease of short-term thinking can be seen everywhere, from our rotting infrastructure to the weakening of the middle class, to our failure to truly address the long-term issues of our time. We are far more involved with consuming than we are with citizenship. And while 21st century Americans are the most technologically well-informed citizenry in our history, we may also be the least self-aware. Now, I realize at this point you could be thinking I'm showing my roots as a liberal. But, honest to God, I see myself as a bleeding heart conservative, especially when I ask, why do today's Republicans take so little pride in Dwight Eisenhower? Why throughout the 2008-2012 election cycles, with so many candidates seeking the nomination, with all the speechifying and debates, the countless hours of recorded appearances, did we never once hear a reference to Dwight Eisenhower? I think it's because Ike's concerns for his country's future have come to pass. America today is simply the product of his military-industrial complex. But Americans, for the most part, right and left, refuse to look at that. And then, as if I just heard them shout out, Norman, remember us, the 47 senators who wrote to Iran? Proving Ike correct in the first draft when he called it the military-industrial congressional complex. In 1980, with the proliferation of evangelical television ministries, most of them fundamentalist, religion was now entering the mix. And there on my television, preaching to his television congregation, was the Reverend James Robison, brandishing a Bible like it was a bomb, and in Jesus' name declaiming, and these are his words, this nation was built upon a Christian foundation, upon a Bible foundation. Eisenhower, elsewhere on the tube, the Reverend Jerry Falwell was deciding and declaring, I hope I live to see the day when, as in the early days of our country, we won't have any public schools. The churches will have taken them over again, and Christians will be running them. What a happy day that'll be. And as their crusades to spread fear and division became increasingly blatant, so did my desire to reveal what they really were about in the most powerful way I could, storytelling, through art, in my case, only storytelling. And I began making notes for a screenplay entitled Religion, with the intent to satirize the fundamentalist TV ministries as savagely as Paddy Chayefsky mocked television in the film network. And then one day, I tuned in Jimmy Swaggart and his TV ministry and caught the Reverend railing about a constitutional issue that was due to come before the Supreme Court and asking us, his godly viewers, to pray for, he did this, removal of a certain Supreme Court justice. And that was the last straw for me. Instead of telling my story as a 2-hour movie, I filmed it as a 1-minute public service announcement and found a terrific actor he was wearing working clothes in a factory setup on a piece of heavy equipment. He was looking straight into the camera and saying that he and his wife and kids disagree about political matters all the time around the dinner table. And now there are some ministers on radio and television telling them that they're good Christians or bad Christians, depending on their political points of view. And he declares his wife a much better Christian than him. His kids he knows to be better also. And he winds up saying, so there's got to be something wrong when anybody tells you you are a good or a bad Christian, depending on your political point of view. That's not the American way. Well, the PSA got a lot of attention. We bought time for it on a local TV station here in Washington. And that led to national news, nightly news coverage. Before I knew it, I was on the evening news shows. And as awareness grew, various religious leaders and political figures got behind it. And at one point, someone said, you know, I like what that guy says in that PSA. That's not the American way. You guys ought to organize around this and call yourselves People for the American Way. Well, People for was 1 year old with our numbers and our impact growing when we became more and more aware that all of the talk about God and patriotism, morality, and love of country had been appropriated by the religious right. I think that's true to this minute, with the left acquiescing by way of its silence. We had to do something. So People for the American Way, with the bipartisan support, and I love this, of President Ford and Lady Bird Johnson, they both agreed to do this. As co-chairs of the evening, we did our version of the American Way in a 2-hour special on ABC. We told the American story in which God and the flag belong to all of us. I Love Liberty was its name. 2-hour all-star celebration of American history, diversity, and patriotism, with Senator Barry Goldwater and Jane Fonda sharing the same stage. Love that. And it further established the People for the American Way brand. Today, we are 1 million strong, working to defend the arts and fight for the American way with, and I'm especially crazy about this, group of young elected officials. They're young people who have been elected to public office in 50 states across the country, our next generation of progressive leadership. I don't wake up many mornings, read my daily paper, and not thank God that People for the American Way is there. Why not? Talk about art opening doors, because that television show, those 2 hours with those people supporting it, was art leading the way. But inevitably, the opening of those doors is followed by efforts to suppress them, to suppress the art that flows through them. We've seen book burnings and book bannings since the invention of the printing press. But technology today, or more specifically the internet and social media, has increased the power of the arts exponentially. And because of this, we live in a time when the artistic voice has never been more threatened also. We witnessed this in Mega 3D recently when a nation attacked a corporation. North Korea versus Sony Pictures. And as difficult a moment as that was, I thought it less threatening than the possibility of an age of pre-censorship in which certain subjects are deemed off limits, lest they turn out to offend. We all take it as a given that art is beneficial to society, but do we put sufficient value on that art for art's sake and for all people? Many of the powerful in this world, including the former chairman of our beloved House Budget Committee, or isn't he still chairman, Congressman Paul Ryan, and those big spenders who fund from private foundations such as David Koch, who is making Lincoln Center his playground, are not necessarily convinced of the good for all people part. It's good for them. It's good for that playground. It's good to be associated with Lincoln Center, if not to own it. They tend to measure the impact of the arts on us solely by the number of tourists and hotel accommodations their museums and performing arts venues are attracting. And so across the country, funding for the arts for all our people and their children is paltry. In low-income and impoverished neighborhoods, arts programs have been eliminated altogether. At no time can I recall our culture being so estranged from this essential part of itself, and a culture that has become a stranger to its own inner human needs, which are, for better or worse, intuitive, mysterious, and unquantifiable, just maybe a culture out of touch with the best of its humanity. Why have we abdicated our need to explore the most basic values? Why in our schools and our homes are we so reluctant to grapple with those core questions? I would suggest that involvement with our inner selves has given way to pursuing a vision of human salvation through technology and consumerism. I wonder often if high-rolling arts lovers would be more disposed to funding arts education for all if science had come up with a way to measure the change in hearts, minds, moods, and attitudes that music, film, literature, the arts generally are capable of evoking. I can't think about the arts this way without touching on the place from which I believe they emanate, the life of the spirit. We don't hear much about that these days, but ever since my early 20s, when I smoked my first good cigar, I have felt that if there was no other reason to believe in God, it would be Havana Leaf. I've had similar epiphanies while biting into a ripe peach, a great ear of corn, and I've sensed a higher presence hundreds of times while standing behind the audiences at our tapings and watching 250 strangers coming forward as one, rising in their seats and then falling back as people do when they're laughing from the belly. A hunger for connectedness stalks our nation today, and art is the umbilical of connectedness. Why is there such a reticence in our culture to discuss what may be the most distinctive trait of us humans, the inner part that is the wellspring of our species' creativity, that element of our being that gives rise to our sense of awe and wonder and longing for truth, beauty, and a higher order of meaning? I suggest that we've entrusted that exploration to our various organized religions, where a stained glass solemnity, a holy scripture and a holy man, very rarely a woman, await our weekly visits. There we join the family of God, but as branches of that family, not necessarily in harmony, Christian, Islamic, Hindu, Jewish, Buddhist, and many the fundamentalist versions of each, resulting today in warring tribes and sects across the globe, and the terror and beheadings that have followed, and in our own country helping to fuel the multiple social and political rifts in the fabric of our culture. Inevitably, it is the arts that are attacked first, and the more powerful the fundamentalists of any religion, the quicker and more vigorous the attacks. These attacks on works of art arrive in the guise of protecting us for our own good from that which the self-appointed arbiters regard as filth or evil, or simply not good for us, like the many truths for which they deem we are not ready. I see a symbiotic relationship between the needs of big capital and religious leaders and their institutions. That was the core of the network's problem when in 1971, after 3 years of effort, we finally made it to the air with All in the Family, followed by Maude, Good Times. Thank you. We writers, producers, directors, and actors were simply mirroring life in our time as we saw it. But we were accused of sending messages. If making bigotry sound foolish is a message, we stand guilty, I responded. And then one day, I thought about the shows that preceded our arrival on the scene, like Leave It to Beaver, Ozzie and Harriet, Father Knows Best. And the biggest problem those families faced was, oh my God, the roast is ruined and the boss is coming to dinner. Or, holy moly, Mom dented the car. How are we going to keep Dad from finding out? And how about the message in those shows? For 2 decades, America was being told it had no race issues, no bigotry, no wars, no health problems, no unwanted pregnancies. How nifty. It was certainly expressing a point of view as all art has a way of doing. But at what level? What impact? Well, I've learned something about that very recently. Most of the time, the impact of art cannot be measured, and that's because the way art works, it's magic. You don't often know what's happening to you, but you become one, as I suggested earlier. And this became crystal clear to me. And surprisingly, for the first time in Los Angeles, only a few weeks ago, with my friend, Common. It was an evening in my honor that saw the Television Academy co-sponsor with 7 well-known members of the hip-hop community, among them Common. The evening was called An Evening with Norman Lear, and I loved the tagline particularly. What do a 92-year-old Jew and the world of hip-hop have in common? I could not have been more touched by the answer. Those paying me tribute had been affected, but in deep, life-mattering ways by my work and the work of our team, all the writers, producers, directors, actors. As the originator and leader of a giant collaboration of the arts, it was all of us that were represented in our shows and films. I'd never, all those years in production, thought of what I did as art, what we were all doing. Never thought of it as art. But that night, with Grammy and Oscar winner Common, and 7 other major figures out of the world of music and hip-hop, I was led to a trough I'd been to before, but this time I was made to drink. Our moderator, Toure, great talent, led the participants through stories of how an episode, perhaps just a moment, in Good Times, The Jeffersons Are All in the Family, Sanford and Son, had enriched their lives or made them see something their realities had, to that point, obscured. The stories, as they were told, sweetened the memory of others and triggered new ones. Common's life, for example, had been changed by a single episode of The Jeffersons. Baratunde Thurston would not have become the man he is without the example of John Amos, who played the father on Good Times. Janet Jackson guest starred on an episode as an abused child, and the story virtually changed the direction of a young poet, hip-hopper Dee Nice's life. One after another, the stories tumbled out of everyone, and the evening became an on-camera love-in that 4 well-placed cameras gobbled up. There were tears, of course, but, and this is the point of it all, the tears were not just from those on stage. There were tears in the audience as well. On stage, each performer was reflecting on a key memory and then passing that experience to the others. What I hadn't accepted, no matter my long career, was that others, in quotes, included the audience, no less than the performers. I had spent half my life sending audiences out of our studios, laughing, crying, feeling, and thinking, but somehow had not accepted the depth of it all, the art of it all. As my grandmother would say, go no. We take many journeys in life that are horizontal, learning more about this subject, that subject, the next subject, on and on. But there's only one vertical journey, and that is into ourselves. And in recent weeks, months, more than at any time in my life, I have observed that journey, I can say probably for the first time, as close as I could get. So it has taken me 92 years, 8 months, and a day to get here tonight to tell all you that. I mean, that's a lot of time and effort. On the other hand, it has taken every minute, every split second of each of your lives to come here this evening to the Kennedy Center to spend this time with me. Think about it. Every second of your lives you have spent getting to this moment. Add it up and you'll see I win. And even this I get to experience. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Let's give Norman one more round of applause, please. Good evening, buenas noches. I am Abel Lopez, Chairman of the Board of Americans for the Arts. I want to thank Norman for that personal and inspiring speech, as well as Common for his amazing introduction of Norman Lear. A transcript of Mr. Lear's speech is now available on our website at americansforthearts.org. And you can watch again the entire proceedings of tonight's event on the Americans for the Arts YouTube channel beginning this week. I also want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. And of course, a very special thanks to the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts for serving as the host venue. Finally, as we conclude, I want to send you home with one more special closing musical tribute in honor of Norman Lear. In 2010, on this very stage, the Kennedy Center produced a star-studded celebration of the arts in America, featuring Smokey Robinson, Bransford Marsalis, John Mayer, and the National Symphony Orchestra. As part of that celebration, our music director for this evening, Nolan Williams Jr., composed and premiered a new song that conveys the story of two youth, a boy from a town called Hope who aspires for a career on Broadway, and a young girl who simply wants to dance. This song embodies the spirit of this evening, reminding us of the importance and the impact of the arts on our world. So please welcome again our music director, Nolan Williams Jr., the Voices of Inspiration, the Atlanta Symphony Youth Orchestra, and special guests Maya McBride-Wheaty and Ty Berry from the Duke Ellington School of the Arts, along with the emerging talent of Anthony Whittingham, as they inspire us with this closing selection entitled, Life's Inspired by a Song.
In the town called Hope, there was a boy who loved to go to musicals and plays. Though his folks were poor, he dared to dream of having a career on screen and stage. So he practiced very hard to perfect his dream and art, hoping someday all his effort would pay off. Some way, somehow, somewhere, life's inspired by a song, by the power of a song. Like that young boy, I hope, I pray, I dare to be one who carry on
living in poverty, knowing dreams come eventually, with resistance from doubt, sleepless nights and pain. My heart, mind, and soul was focused on the victory. Even in a town called Hope, this little boy and daddy's little girl knew dedication turned dreams into goals, then achievements. Seek repentance in order to control your destination. See, I wrote essays at 3 a.m. with rhythm to get me a platinum plaque. No, so soaring isn't just for eagle's wings. Music and poetry then set me free. I'll make my dreams a reality. My life's inspired by a song. My life's inspired by a song. It's everything that I had ever dreamed. And one day I'ma really soar. I pray the Lord